Happy New Year, Ashley.
Happy New Year to you guys.
2022, it's our year. Here we come.
It's super exciting. We're all hopeful for new things and new rhythms, right?
New things and new rhythms. Yes, so good. So you're in Colorado, and just give a quick snapshot of what your life looks like.
Sure. Yeah. We relocated last year, last spring to Colorado. We love changing seasons and mountains. I am a mom of 4. They're all in school, which is a beautiful blessing after COVID, because we homeschooled for a year. And so now I get to focus my attention on writing and podcasting and things like that, and have a quiet house. And my husband is a pastor of spiritual formation at a church in Boulder County.
Yeah, you are right in my spot where my people are. So it makes me happy to know that you're so close to so many people that I love. And you're close to me too, but Boulder County is full of people I love. So that was new information to me as we were chatting before we started recording. So I'm still kind of giddy about this detail, this new information.
It's so exciting.
Tell us about your transition out of COVID. Like, how has that been for you?
Thankfully my family has remained healthy and all of that. So that has felt like just a huge blessing. But the transition, I think, is hard in that I'm finding it hard to know how best to meet people, right? Having moved to a new place, and what's appropriate, and how to kind of get deeper roots in a particular place, as well as just even, help my kids transition well, moving across state lines. So I think there's a lot of questions about, what does it look like to belong? What does it look like to keep up our good family rhythms that we had when it was just the 6 of us? And now society's opened up a little bit more. But I think too, COVID has helped me kind of stay open about some of those questions, rather than like, okay, I need to get everything on the calendar and get it all sorted and make sure we belong really quick. So I think that's good. It feels healthier, but sometimes it just feels more new too.
Well, I do think that gets to some of those deeper places. And that's what we're talking about today, as we are in the Healthy Way series. And today specifically, we're focusing on our spiritual world and the health of ourselves spiritually. And everything you just said really points to, or can be an outflow of where we are spiritually. And so talk to us about this idea that you call a spacious life. What does that mean?
It really comes from Psalm 18:19, where the psalmist writes that he brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. And I just love that verse. And I think we, especially as women who are used to spinning plates and getting everything done, the idea of a spacious place just feels like, oh, I can breathe there. But I think we tend, especially as busy women who are juggling all the things, moms and daughters and friends and neighbors and colleagues, we are so used to doing and thinking that our doing is going to be the thing that's going to get us to that spacious place. But instead, it's actually, that is a place that we can find with God that is not contingent on our circumstances.
As I think about that, even hearing you talk, we all kind of settle in right into that, oh yes, that's what I want. And yet it really is so contrary to how most of us live. And that is the tension, because most of us don't live in that space. We actually live in more of a frenzied, busy, too much to do space. And I think what's hard is that meaningful work is important in our lives, right? And actually giving to society or supporting our families, whatever, or parenting children is important. Getting laundry done, having the house, not be a wreck, all of that is important. And so we can't neglect it. So help us to hold that tension a little bit and help us to like differentiate what it is that we need to do while still doing the things we need to do, but then also finding this spacious place, as you're saying.
I think a lot of it has to do with priorities and, and even asking ourselves the question, like, where do we run to for comfort? Can be like a good framework type of question. I know when I feel like this frenzied pace, I pick up my phone and I like go through email and I go through social media, like before I've even like left my bed. And that's not setting me up to experience like this sense of spaciousness, right? It's like, oh, I have all these things to do and I'm already behind. But when I choose, for instance, to not run to my phone for comfort and maybe like, okay, it's okay. Email can wait till noon and I'm going to spend time, like cleaning the kitchen, but like not making that time productive too. I don't have to do 20 things like while I'm cleaning the kitchen or, walking my kids to school, moving my body at a human pace, choosing to be outside and get sunshine on your face or drink a glass of water instead of like this constant need to achieve and do, because we can so easily link that achieving and doing of good things to who we actually are. And what we do can't be who we are, or we're always going to feel that sort of internal frenzied pace, even if our life slows down or we get a vacation or whatnot. So I think it's realizing, okay, where do I run for comfort? What are maybe some good guardrails I can put into my time and my attention to focus on the things that actually matter instead of, being kind of at the whim of my circumstances or my to-do list.
Yeah. When you said walking at, what did you say? A human pace?
Human pace. Yeah.
I thought, yeah, even when I am moving my body intentionally, I am doing it in kind of a frenzied way.
Right.
I'm working out and I'm like, I got to get my workout in. I got to go because it's good for me to move my body. And then I have to sit down and do all my emails, but at least I know I've moved my body. But whoa, just what if I moved intentionally at a slower pace? That I'm going to sit in that for a little bit because that could be a mind shift for me too. I find I even speed walk in my house, right? Like I need to get to this room as quickly as possible. What is wrong with me? Oh my Lord.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's good. And it becomes a spiritual discipline too. It's not, it's not like we have to beat ourselves up to be like, I'm walking too fast. Like, what's wrong with me? It is to just to realize, okay, like I'm noticing this thing again. And like my body has things to teach me about who I am in Jesus, and I should pay attention. And then we can start again.
Yeah, I once heard someone talk about that, the walking pace, how it's like 3 miles an hour, basically. And that even in our relationships, we try and speed up, right? And try and like, but actually, like Jesus walked at like 3 miles an hour. And that's actually a really good thing to keep in our heads, right?
Yeah.
Like he walked with people kind of in this easy pace that wasn't rushed, that wasn't like trying to force things. I don't know. It really hit me as a way to look at kind of how we're moving through the world. I thought that was really good.
And what's so fascinating too is, as we're talking about this sort of spaciousness of soul, like how we actually get there is through our limits, right? It's through our bodily limits. It's through, the limits in our time and our budget and our attention, our season of life. And I think particularly as women, we're like, no, knock down all the barriers. Like I have no limits. And it's not to say we can't have ambition or work hard, but I think we don't honor our limits. And if we don't honor our limits, we're not going to be attentive, like you're saying, that Jesus was attentive, like walking instead of like, he wasn't like doing marathons all around Galilee. He was paying attention to people.
Oh my gosh. I love that. The Galilee marathons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you imagine?
I love that so much. So, give us just a little bit, like I want even like a snapshot from your life of like a real life scenario of how this plays out in your own family.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it it's really interesting. It's just to acknowledge that like busyness creeps in. And so, my kids, this year are two of them are on club soccer teams. And so like, that is a new thing for us. We had never really done that before. And so it's like, okay, well, the only reason we even decided to do it was like, because they had both had practice in this at the exact same time on the exact same days. So those 2 days are crazy, but then it's like the rest of the week, we can live at that slower pace. And so even just realizing what does my family need and what capacity do I have right now? And I think as moms, particularly, we think the point is to like run our children to every possible thing so that they can succeed and be happy. But you get to say, no, you don't have to do that if it doesn't like fit in with the life that you want for your family. And so I think, for us, it's like, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to try it for a year. And if it's insane and we're running at a crazy pace and we don't play games on Sundays, and if that means you lose your spot, okay, whatever. Like, we are not going to serve soccer as our God. So we are going to put those limits around us. It looks like for me personally, when the house is quiet, going on walks, it looks like, good conversations, even on the Voxer messaging app with other writer friends around the world. It looks like, choosing to eat dinner around our dinner table, like 5 nights a week. And if we have a crazy week, to then choose, okay, I need a week to recover, and to honor those limits and to recognize that we're not like our iPhones who can just be plugged in and then, to keep working harder. But actually we are made to rest. And it's a good gift from a good God to rest our bodies, in the evening, and to rest our bodies one day in practice of Sabbath.
How do you rest your mind? Because I feel like a lot of people, the problem is the mental stress.
Right.
And I hear people talk, as they talk about sleep problems and anxiety, that it's the mind going.
Yeah.
How do you help your mind slow down as a practice, as you're thinking about your spiritual life and wanting to focus more on who Jesus is and less on the running thoughts?
That's such a good one. A lot of it helps when I do move my body throughout the day. So like you get some of that anxious energy out of your body instead of like spinning in the middle of the night. So that is something, or like sugar and caffeine, like actually paying attention to that and realizing that will help your sleep. But I think a lot of it too is like, really, am I a verbal processor? Can I ask someone to pray for me? Can I actually talk some of this out? Even if it's just a phone call with a friend, so that it's not just like everything becomes kind of inwardly directed. And then even just like choosing to not get like this information overload with screens after about dinner time is also something that's really important. So I try to not like be watching a show in bed with my husband every night, because then I'm like start analyzing all the characters and then, thinking about my calendar, and there's too many things going on. But I think even just that, we haven't been as successful. My husband and I have done this emotionally healthy spirituality course with Pete Scazzaro, emotionally healthy discipleship. And he has like a morning and evening prayer devotional. And we were always awesome in the mornings, but the evenings were always a little bit challenging because you're just exhausted. But those sorts of things, like in the evening prayer and having that like as a normal part of our rhythm and routine, help just kind of slow some of those anxious spinning thoughts. So even just like a small, like I'm going to read a psalm before bed, and take a bath, instead of like reading every op-ed possible and, whatever it is, that you're just like, oh no, problems of the world. So I think even just a few things like that are helpful starting places.
Lectio 365, that app also has a morning and evening. And so you can even do the evening one where you just turn it on and you just can close your eyes and lay in bed or go on a walk or whatever. And so I think that's a helpful tool as well. I was thinking about, as you were talking, I've been reading about mindfulness. And one of the things that they're saying is that people have hijacked mindfulness to really it be all about peace, kind of finding your peace in that mindfulness practice. But actually the purpose of mindfulness, which a lot of times, as Christians, we just call like, our quiet space before God. It's the same thing really, right? But that it's actually get in touch with the inner place. And so, and that could be hard feelings, that could be sad feelings, that could be joy, it could be peace, but that's actually not the point, is to find that Zen. It's actually to get in touch with what's happening in your inner world. And as we're talking about spiritual health, I would just love to know those thoughts of what is it that, the mindfulness people are saying, no, we need to go back to true mindfulness, but even just coming at it from a faith perspective, what is the point of having that quiet space? And how do we allow God to kind of enter fully into that space with us as we're accessing everything going on?
I think it's been really transformative for me to practice silence kind of as a spiritual discipline. Because, when you're silent and you're choosing to be silent before God, not just like to zone out and zen out kind of thing, but when you're silent, right, that's when you're like, oh, the grocery list, and like, oh, I have all these things to do. And like my hands get itchy. I want to like check Instagram one more time. And it really brings up our inability to be able to be quiet. But what's so beautiful about those sorts of things with God is that you can just simply like bring your attention back to Jesus, even just like saying, okay, Jesus, here I am again, and as that becomes a habit, as we actually practice silence, like there's all of these studies about like how our brains are actually rewired, because when we're able to sit in silence, all of these health benefits. And it's actually amazing, as you begin to practice something like that. And as part of your spiritual practice, you then like, I seriously go about the world in a much more calm place. I'm less likely to like react crazy to my children if, or a stressor of another sort pops up. And so I think, practicing some things like that too are another way to begin to get into, like you're saying, exactly like you're saying, Krista, about can we be present with God even in uncomfortable feelings? As we see Jesus, for instance, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is very present to the agony that's awaiting him on the cross. And again, he's asking his disciples, stay up with me, watch with me, pray with me. And they don't. And yet he continually submits his own will to the will of the Father, and in agony too. And so I think we have that example too, to say, yeah, we're not like contemplating going to be crucified, obviously, for, to atone for the sins of humanity. But there are lots of hard things that will come up in those silent moments. And yet, because Jesus took the no of God the Father, we always get his yes. And so we have someone who will be with us in that silent, hard space too.
And that gets to what you said at the beginning about where do we find our comfort? Because so many of our habits that aren't productive, I shouldn't use that word, that aren't healthy,
right,
are because we're trying to self-medicate in some way.
Sure.
And that could just be distraction even, right? That it doesn't have to be substance or consuming something. It could just be our busyness, because we don't want to deal with those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, it takes a lot of bravery to stick with them.
So Ashley, as we're, looking at even our time, there's a fine, I like what you said about boundaries and about that we only have so much time in a day. And actually those boundaries are a gift to us. And I believe that that's true, that God actually knows we would literally run ourselves ragged, right?
Yeah.
Like to the point of absolute exhaustion without those boundaries of, oh, you have to sleep. You have to do this.
Yeah.
And so, but I also think so we have those physical limitations, but there's also limitations that can help us to have a more spacious, to have a more spacious life. And so, and that has to do with what we say yes to and what we say no to. So I would love just run us through a grid. You know, what is your grid? What do you personally use as you're looking at yeses and nos? And how do you discern what the no's are? Because sometimes that's hard too.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think it's odd where I am currently, because where we were before, my husband was a church planter, and it was kind of like we were all in all the time for everybody, you know, and then they would like step back or not be all in. And you know, it just, yeah, it was a lot to kind of, it was our circumstances in a lot of ways dictated our yeses. Like we had to show up, we had to set up chairs, we had to be there to disciple people. And now in this role and our move, we are kind of invited like step by step into relationships and into purpose and into mission and into work, which feels a little bit weird, like as a person, because I've been used to continually showing up and doing it all and like kind of being a vacuum cleaner, and like whatever is missing and around, I will vacuum it up. Like whatever needs doing. And so, but I think there is such an invitation in that as well, is to say, okay, how do we say the right yeses and how do we say the right nos? And to first of all, realize we're going to get it wrong. Don't worry, you will make a mistake. Because I think sometimes we can be paralyzed that, yes, oh, shoot, I said yes to too many things. And now I've gone and messed up my life. And the good news of Jesus is that there is restoration and redemption and hope, no matter what you say yes and no to. But, you know, I think one thing I always encourage folks to do is to like make a delight list. And this is helpful for both like a practice of rest and Sabbath, but I think it's also practical for us to think about, how do we say yes and no to? Like, how has God made you? What brings you delight? For me, I love being out in nature. Like beauty and art are really important. Reading and deep thinking and deep conversations just like bring me so much life, hospitality, life around the table. And so to say, not only, you know, so when I'm presented with an option, like we are hosting all the small group leaders at our church, to kind of just help restore them once a month and feed them good food. And I'm like, I love this. This is so great. I love feeding like a bunch of charcuterie to people and just being like, Jesus loves you. So, you know, like, so to notice and pay attention to how God has made you and what brings you delight, and to like press forward into some of those sorts of things is a really good, at least like pathway. And it's not like a framework or a math equation, but it's a good pathway. And then I think also to realize that some of the limits, you know, when we talk about like, oh, good, I get to say no to all of these things, you know, so I don't have to like volunteer for the PTA or anything. I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. But some of the limits maybe that Jesus is inviting us into, they could pinch and they could hurt a little bit, but they're meant to grow us. I have 4 kids, and yeah, staying home with 4 littles felt very claustrophobic at times, especially when they were little, and I missed like being out in the world and having important conversations. But now, like 15 years later, I can look back and say, like, that's when I was actually becoming more of who God wanted me to be. And those limits shaped me too. So just there's that pathway of delight, but then also you might want to just take a step back and go, okay, maybe God is inviting me into some of these limits that don't feel really good right now, but they're actually making me more like Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking some women that have kids at home or a spouse be thinking, well, what if I'm called to something that somebody else delights in? You know, like the responsibility of the shoulds. Well, I should do, so I can say yes to things that I love and no to things that I don't really want to when it's just me. But when it has to do with other people, that's when we get sucked into the running around, right? Because my child delights in this.
Yeah.
How do we discern, again, how best to do that as a unit, as a group, as a community? I mean, as you said, sometimes somebody has to put the chairs out at church.
Right.
So, how do we discern between the things that have to get done and when it's an opportunity to say no?
Yeah. I think that is the challenge. I think, I mean, ultimately, like our churches are families and our families are families, and families have to step up and do stuff for each other. Like someone's got to clean the toilet and someone's got to unload the dishwasher, even if you don't love doing those things.
Mhm.
And I think maybe the question to ask is, you know, do you, are you all in for this family called your neighborhood or your church or your nuclear family? And we need like our nuclear families to be in on something other than themselves, I think. Um, because we aren't meant to do life alone, even in a nuclear family. And, I think maybe even just to figure out like, what does it look like to be all in for a particular season, and then maybe like there's some rotation of some of
Mm.
that time, or that that you are being filled in important ways and not just pouring out in important ways. So whether that looks like if you're a stay-at-home parent and you're like, I need to go sit in a coffee shop by myself with no one touching me for 3 hours every Saturday, like that is something then that can restore your yeses to all the running around that you kind of just have to do. Or maybe you're setting up chairs for your church, and like that becomes exhausting, for you, in not just your body, but your spirit. And so to say, okay, I'm going to do this for 6 months and then I'm going to cycle off and I'm going to do something else. But there's always ways I think that we can still be serving, but maybe it's even just trying to figure out what is that, not balance, because I don't like that word, but what is that rhythm of both extending ourselves and receiving?
Mhm. That's good, because a lot of women, I think, do have responsibilities that
Yeah.
they feel like, I can't just opt out of this.
Right.
And our pastor used to say, there's diaper duty. Like there's nobody feels
Right.
called to change
Right,
the
yeah.
poopy diapers, but it has to be done within a church community.
Yeah.
That some jobs just have to get done. And I think that was a good
Mhm.
perspective to say, but then if you are giving out in a lot of ways that are exhausting for
Yeah.
you, how are you
Yeah.
receiving?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think there's also the question too of like, do you feel supported, in those serving roles too? Do you
Mhm.
feel other parts of you are being cared for by Jesus and by your community too? Do you feel heard? And so I think we can do a lot of hard things if we have people with us.
I was even thinking, and we can do hard things when we're creative about how we do them as well. So maybe if something has to be done, but it's burning you out, well, hit the refresh button on it. Like we like to say that a lot in the sisterhood. Like, what's a third way to think about it? Can you say, hey, this has to be, these chairs, we keep using the chairs, but the chairs have to be set up. So how could I do that differently so it's not such a burden? Like there has to be another like system that we can use, right?
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden your creativity is moving and you're coming at it from a third way thinking vantage point, which I think is helpful in those scenarios.
Yeah. Turn it into a dance party and bring your donuts. And
totally. That would probably be my MO. Okay. So let's go back to this idea of delight. I think it's an important one. And I do want us to go back to that. I don't know that a lot of people, and maybe that's not true, but maybe some people don't put Jesus and the word delight together. And yet, how do you see those actually going together well? I think people would say love, sacrifice, joy, like maybe some of those words, but delight is surprising to couple with Jesus. And so talk about that connection there.
I love that the first time we hear the audible voice of God the Father, it's when Jesus is baptized and he says like, this is my son. I love him. I'm so pleased with him. Like, listen to him. And I think, like he's just saying like, this is my boy. It's like the parent on the soccer sidelines being like, yeah, that's my kid. He scored the goal. He's amazing. Or even just like the little kids on the soccer field that aren't doing anything, but you're just like, they're amazing. They're just out there running around and, picking flowers on the field. And I think we have just so tamed, I think, the delight of God. Maybe we're afraid to receive it. I think probably like, ooh, what would that be like if I'm not hustling and hurrying through my life and checking the boxes. Like, what if I actually believe that God was pleased with me because he sees Jesus, his kid, who he's like so stoked on. And yeah, so I think part of that is just like retraining and retelling that story in ways that freshen it, to remind ourselves that God is a God of triune love and delight. Like that's why he created the world. And, he cared for Adam and Eve even after they sinned, and he clothed them, and he is going to great lengths to rescue his children. And we get to receive that delight, that rescue. And so when Jesus was walking the earth, it's like he was called a drunkard, right? And a friend of sinners, because he feasted with people that we often don't feast with, or we don't feast at all. Everything's going through the drive-through. And like he took time and he was with people and he enjoyed them. Like he wouldn't keep getting invites if he was like boring and a wallflower and just so worried that being with people was going to make him, unworthy or something. And so I think that's just a good reminder, even just like the Jewish calendar, like all the festivals were like timed with the new moon. So there'd be like more light so you could feast for longer. And to say that our God is actually a God that is full of delight and in whom delight dwells. And, maybe some of our challenge is to retell that story to figure out, how do I both receive God's delight and practice delighting in him, even if it feels like awkward, like learning how to play again after having not done it for decades. And then you have kids and you're like, I'm going to play Barbies and this is awkward, but okay. So.
I think that's a great definition, and even maybe a better way to say that. I think that's a great connection of what that looks like as we're looking at it through the lens of Jesus and the lens of even his heart toward us, and that he created us, and there's even delight in that creation. And I think that's an important piece that we don't always internalize. Like if you really internalize that changes you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because we don't often, have that same kind of viewpoint that God sees us in that way. So that's really beautiful. And I even think about we were created uniquely. And so as we express that uniqueness in the world, different things bring us delight, right? And so even as just, I think, good modeling, like, tell us what brings you delight, and like, how can you encourage women to find what brings them delight?
Yeah. I think, things that bring me a lot of delight are, of course it's like the feast or with the candlelight, around the table with, all of those things. And I wish like life could all be about feasting, where you've got candles and flowers on the table and great conversations, but most of the time it's just like, okay, we got our chicken tenders from, the local grocery store, and here we go, dinner around the table. And so I think though, is to just like, even what are things that I could even find that still feels like delight. And so the other day, for instance, I was like, I had an extra piece of cake from my kid's birthday, and I was like, I'm going to put it on the pretty patterned dish and have a cup of tea in an actual teacup. I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to like take this moment to have something beautiful, even if it's something small, and, things that bring me delight. Yeah. Great books, great conversations, the changing of seasons, being out in nature. And I think a lot of things too, we find if you like go back to maybe your like second to fourth grade self, is to like remember what brought you delight. Was it like swimming in the pool and doing handstands with your friends? Was it playing jump rope? Was it, I created like this little girls like club, and I like made binders for everybody like in fourth grade, I think. And it's a little bit weird, but to be like, okay, well, community is really important to me. I can like look back and find some of those threads and say, okay, what can I do now? I'm not going to like join the Girl Scouts, but like I could probably grab a few girlfriends and we could go and do something and have an adventure, go to an art gallery or something. So even trying to translate some of those earlier things that brought you delight into your adult life, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful, even as we're looking at that. Okay, so as we're headed into a new year and people are looking at this idea of spiritual health, I feel like we've talked about a lot of different aspects today.
Yeah.
So maybe bring it all together and just like say, okay, so as you are approaching this new year, here are some ways that you can really get healthier.
Yeah. I think it would be to recognize to first maybe write down a delight list and then write down a limit list. We all have different kind of seasons of life or energy levels. So many different, budget constraints and health constraints. And to begin to like put those together in ways that feel manageable. Cause I think often in the new year, we're like, yes, a new year and everything's going to change. And I'm going to, finally read my Bible for an hour a day. And we bite off more than we can chew. So I would say to hold those two things in tension and maybe even just take a few weeks and like pray through those lists. And ask God, what's one small sustainable step that I can take towards health? So whether that's like reading a devotional on the Psalms or something and say, okay, I'm going to try to read one Psalm a day. Like I'm not going to do an in-depth Bible study or anything like that, but I'm going to just sit with that Psalm. Or maybe you do like one Psalm a week and you just keep reading the same thing again and again. And that might be something to just simply say, okay, I'm going to practice dwelling here and not like making even my spiritual life something else to check off or be productive. So practicing kind of that spaciousness of soul in slowing down, picking something manageable and choosing to believe that you aren't somehow less than if you're not accomplishing something spiritually, that the Spirit of God lives in you and he will produce fruit.
Yeah. It's the spiritual version of walking at 3 miles per hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's allowing God's word to soak in us. And it's almost as if we want to conquer the Bible or like we want to, I don't know what the right words are, but we have this productivity built into us and also the speed of life that we want to just consume at a fast rate and produce at a fast rate. And what if God was saying, no, sit, take this little portion, your daily bread, and nothing more, just give me this day, my daily bread, and to sit with that portion. And let the portion nourish us and not try to gorge what our portions are for the next week because it sounds more productive.
Yeah. It's like we can use even the Bible to push off God, and our spiritual disciplines instead of sitting and receiving.
Yeah. And a few years ago, I started doing much like I just pick a book of the Bible and I literally will do like one verse or two verses, in a day and journal about those. And I've been amazed at how taking smaller bites have led to greater growth. I mean, you just wouldn't, and that's not for everybody. That's just kind of what I needed at that time. And I don't always do that, but it's been actually very helpful. The small bites actually have produced more fruit, which has been ironic,
Yeah. That's powerful.
Well, thank you, Ashley. This has been really helpful. And I think just a really good word as people are focusing on spiritual health in the new year. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you, Krista and Alex. It's been so encouraging to be with you today.